All right, so today on The Explainer, we're diving into a really heated battle over housing in California. The bill at the center of it all is called Senate Bill 79. But we're going to do something a little different here. We're going to look at this whole fight only from the opposition's point of view. Using their own words, their own data, let's unpack exactly why they see this bill as such a major threat.
So right off the bat, this quote from the main opposition group, well, it tells you everything you need to know about how they feel. They're comparing a law to a natural disaster. Think about that. That's an incredibly powerful way to frame this debate. And honestly, it sets the stage for every argument they're about to make.
So, what even is SB 79? Well, according to the folks who oppose it, it's a state law that would let developers build 5 to 6-story apartment buildings near transit. But you've got to pay attention to that term by right. That's the key. It's a total game changer because it means that if a developer's plan checks all the boxes, the city can't really say no. It's a state override of local zoning, plain and simple.
The way this all works, they say, is through this idea of a half-mile radius. I want you to picture this. You take a map and you draw a circle, a half-mile circle, around every single one of these transit stops. They argue that inside that circle, all the old local zoning rules just get thrown out the window, and this new, dense development can push right into neighborhoods that are currently just single-family homes.
And this is the number that is at the absolute heart of their whole argument. 42,760. So what is that? According to their analysis, that's how many new housing units could be built in the area around just one bus stop. Let that sink in for a second. It's a huge, staggering figure, and it's absolutely designed to be.
Right, so a number that big, you're obviously going to ask, okay, where on earth did they get that from? They don't just pull it out of thin air. The opposition actually provides the exact math they used, so let's walk through their calculation together.
Okay, so here's how they get there. It's actually pretty simple math, according to them. They take that big half-mile circle and they split it into 2 rings. The inner ring, that quarter-mile right around the stop, gets rezoned for the highest density, which gives you 12,600 units. Then you move to the outer ring. The density is a little lower, but it's a bigger area, so that adds another 30,160 units. You add the 2 rings together, and boom, there it is, 42,760 potential homes, all from one bus stop.
Okay, so that's the what. That's the mechanics of it. But now we've got to get into the why. You know, beyond just the huge numbers, what are the core reasons they're calling this bad planning and saying vote no? Now, to really hammer home their point about just how extreme this density is, they use a comparison that's, well, it's pretty designed to shock you. They point out that Manhattan, the Manhattan, one of the densest places on the planet, has an average of about 72 housing units per acre. Then they show you that this bill would mandate between 100 and 120 units per acre. That comparison is a cornerstone of their whole argument, that this bill forces density greater than Manhattan on California suburbs.
So, what about local control? Well, they point to this amendment that was supposed to give cities some say, but they call it meaningless. And here's the catch they point out. A city can propose an alternate plan, sure. They can even cut the density in one spot by 50%, but they have to jack it up somewhere else by as much as 200% to make up the difference. They argue it's just a shell game. The total number of units never changes, and those single-family zones stay rezoned for apartments.
And really, this quote from their own analysis just nails down their whole feeling on this. Because the bottom line number of units and the building sizes don't actually change, they see this supposed local control as just an illusion of choice.
So their concerns aren't just about density, right? They lay out a whole bunch of other problems they see. Let's break them down. First, affordability. They claim the bill just incentivizes expensive market-rate housing with no real requirements for affordable units. Second, local planning. They argue it just bulldozes over years of work and millions of dollars cities spent on their own housing plans. Third, infrastructure. They warn about a flood of new people without any money to pay for the new roads, water, and schools needed. And finally, the environment. They're worried about losing trees and open space.
Okay, so we've been talking about the impact of just one single transit stop. But they argue you can't just look at it in a vacuum.
You have to zoom out and see what happens when all these circles start overlapping across a whole city. They call this the cumulative impact.
So they did this case study in one area, and what they found was that SB 79 could potentially create zoning for over 423,000 homes. Now, look at that next to the city's own official housing goal, which was 255,000 units for the entire city. Their whole point with this chart is that the bill doesn't just meet housing goals, it completely overwhelms them.
And this all circles back to their biggest fear, that term we talked about before, by right. Because all these developments are by right, they claim that local communities, city councils, planning commissions, they lose all their power to stop or even shape a project. In their view, this basically hands the keys to the city over to private developers, making them the new, unelected city planners.
Okay, so if they're so against this bill, what's their answer? You know, they're not just saying no to everything. They actually propose a different way forward, a different path to get the housing that everyone agrees California needs.
And this really breaks down the two different visions for how a city should grow. On the one hand, you have what they call SB 79's radial plan, these circles just pushing out everywhere into quiet neighborhoods. Their alternative is what they call linear development. The idea is to build up, yes, but to concentrate that new density only along major commercial streets and transit corridors, leaving the residential neighborhoods untouched.
And this, quote, this is basically their rallying cry. It sums up their entire position. They work really hard to frame this not as being anti-housing, but as being anti this specific kind of top-down, one-size-fits-all plan.
So when you look at their whole case, from the math to the Manhattan comparison to their own alternative plan, it all boils down to one central, really tough question. How do you balance an urgent, undeniable need for more housing with the very human desire to preserve the character of the places people already call home? This bill is one answer, the opposition we've looked at today has another, and that conflict is really at the heart of how our cities are going to grow, not just in California, but pretty much everywhere. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.